Hi, xin chào tất cả mọi người, mình là Vân. Ở video này mình sẽ giới thiệu cho mọi người về cách phản xạ của đoạn thứ hai trong bài Day of the Dead. Mình đi vào luôn nhé.
Fear in the cemetery was like a party.
No.
Was the atmosphere very sad?
No. The atmosphere was not sad. The atmosphere was like a party.
No, the atmosphere was not sad. The atmosphere was like a party. The atmosphere was very happy. Was the atmosphere sad or happy?
The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere was like a party.
The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere was like a party. What was like a party?
The atmosphere. The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Where was the atmosphere like a party?
In the cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery.
In the cemetery. The cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house?
No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party at the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people anywhere. There were people everywhere.
No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Where were the families sitting?
Around the graves. They were sitting around the graves.
Around the graves. Right? They were sitting around the graves. Who was sitting around the graves?
The families. The families were sitting around the graves.
The families. Right? The families were sitting around the graves. Were they sitting around the trees?
No, they wasn't sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves.
No, they weren't sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves. So, where were they sitting?
Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Yes, they were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Yes, yes, they were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their friends?
No, not really. They were sitting around the grave of their dead ancestor.
No, not really. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Who was sitting around the graves?
That's right. Families were sitting around the graves.
That's right. Families were sitting around the graves. Whose graves were they sitting around?
Yes, their dead ancestor. Their ancestor. Yes, ancestor graves.
Whose graves were they sitting around? Yes, their dead ancestors. Their ancestors. Their ancestors' graves. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors or the graves of their friends? Ancestors, right? They were sitting around the graves of their dead.
They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Dead ancestors. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Okay. Who cleaned the graves?
That's right. The families.
That's right, the families. What did they add?
They added fresh flowers.
They added fresh flowers. Did they add food?
No, no, they didn't add fruit.
No, they didn't add food. Did they add money?
No, no, they didn't add money. They added fresh flowers.
No, they didn't add money. They added fresh flowers. What did they clean?
They cleaned the graves.
They cleaned the graves. Whose graves did they clean?
Their ancestor. They cleaned their ancestor graves.
Their ancestors, right? They cleaned their ancestors' graves. Where did they add flowers? Where?
They added flowers to the graves. That's right. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Good. I walked through the cemetery and admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
Well, they added flowers to the graves. That's right. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Good. I walked through the cemetery and admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Where did I walk?
Through the cemetery. I walked through the cemetery.
Through the cemetery. I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the park?
No, I didn't walk through the park.
Where did I walk?
Through the cemetery.
Through the cemetery. Who walked through the cemetery?
I did, AJ. I walked through the cemetery.
I did, AJ. I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the cemetery, or did I walk through the park?
I walked through the cemetery. That's right. And I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
I walked through the cemetery. That's right. And I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Did I admire the beauty of the trees?
No, I didn't admire the beauty of the trees.
No, I didn't admire the beauty of the trees. Did I admire the beauty of the children?
No, I didn't admire the beauty of the children.
No, I didn't admire the beauty of the children. What did I admire?
The flowers. Yeah, I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
The flowers, right? Yeah, I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Who admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers?
That's right. AJ. Me admires the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
That's right. AJ, me, admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Where were the flowers?
On the graves in the cemetery. The flowers were on the graves in the cemetery.
On the graves, right? Or in the cemetery. Right? The flowers were on the graves in the cemetery. Were the flowers in the park?
No, they wasn't in the park.
No, they weren't in the park. Were the flowers in my house?
No, they wasn't in my house.
No, they weren't in my house. Where were the flowers?
The flowers were on the graves in the cemetery.
The flowers were on the graves in the cemetery. Where did I walk?
I walked through the cemetery.
I walked through the cemetery. When did I walk through the cemetery?
November 1st, the Day of the Dead. I walked through the cemetery.
November 1st, the Day of the Dead. Right, November 1st, the Day of the Dead, I walked through the cemetery. What was the cemetery like? Like a party. It
was like a party. The cemetery were like a party.
was like a party. The cemetery was like a party.